So we are in Genesis chapter 12, and yeah, we're moving right along. We're gonna do a little summary of 11 because 11 we went through kind of quick. So we'll talk a little bit about what was in 11 as we move forward. And I have lots of maps to share today, but I found this morning that my maps were not as clear as I thought they were. So clear, and then you know how you look at it and you go, oh, that doesn't really seem all that clear. So we are in Genesis chapter 12 is where we're starting, but we will review some topics from 11, and specifically this of the Chaldeans. So when we talked about where where Abraham was when he was called, we used, let me get to my world map so we can just be oriented here. And now see, by the way, Walmart has all the glasses in the right size for me for just a few dollars. And they had them in packs of 4. So now I have glasses like this all over the place. I'm a 1.75. It's just what I needed, so I'm good. 1.75. I'm trying them all on. I go, this isn't good. This isn't good. No wonder those other ones don't work good for me. They're not the right power.
Yeah, you got the right one. They're playing up.
1.75, and there's quite a few more between 1.7 and 5 in the top number they have, so I've got a ways to go. So that's good.
That top number.
Are you at the top number?
Yeah, top number. No, I'm like 30. I'm like 3.
Okay, so
with chemo, it destroyed my eyes. I got to have cataract surgery, and I don't have to wear anything anymore.
no glasses.
See,
Wow.
there's good. There's a little silver lining in everything.
God just is taking care of you. He's taking good care of you.
Isn't that something my mother used to say? It's no way, absolutely no.
You never understood what she meant until now. I was saying, there's a blessing somewhere in this, and I found it.
So we have here, this is the Old Testament scriptures, and we kind of want to get oriented to where things are occurring. So if we take a look at where things are occurring, this is Israel here, and remember that Terah and his family moved up this river valley up to or Haran, from to Haran. And then now Abraham is going to make his way, Abram. And I found out this morning that there are some people that don't know that Abram and Abraham is the same person. Early on, he was called Abram, and later God changes his name to Abraham. And it has to do with a promise that comes later on. Also Sarai and Sarah are the same name. It's just that later, as the promise comes to fulfillment, God says, now you will be called Abraham, so it's kind of like that. So for now, though, it's Abram, and every once in a while I make the mistake and say Abraham, but it's the same guy. So when he's told to leave his family and everybody and to go, he comes down to this area right here. Now in chapter 11, we read about the Tower of Babel, if you remember, and then in verse 27, we began reading about the account of Terah, and we read that Terah became the father of Abraham and Nahor and Haran. And I have a nice little chart. I'll show you this picture first. This is a picture of a ziggurat. Remember when we talked last week about the Tower of Babel? We talked about these structures, and the one that was the Tower of Babel was like 7 stories high. And remember, it talked that it was made out of brick, that they fired brick, and they thought they were doing like this is going to be something big and tall, and they're going to reach up to heaven, kind of an idea. Well, just so you know, there were a lot of buildings like that, and they started out of this clay and brick, but they soon found, as in the Tower of Babel and others, that they would decompose. And this is a picture of the in the of the Chaldeans, an archaeological site that's in Iraq, where there's a ziggurat in the background. So this is a common. You can see the old this is something that got knocked over or worn with time from ancient times, and you can see one later one in the background here. So we see this up in this northern part of the map where we're at now, where he's living now. But when he goes down south into Egypt, the pyramids are already there. The pyramids had been there like 500 years. The slaves of Israel did not build the pyramids. That's a movie story. It's not. They had lots of big buildings there in that area, and so they were into that. That wasn't something just that only happened to the children of Israel. So I want to show you the family of Terah, because we talk about in verse 27, Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in the Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. Abraham and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Do you see this? Terah had a son named Nahor. Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah was Haran's daughter. Now Sarai was barren and had no children. Back up here it says the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Who's Iscah? Yeah, there you go. It just says Iscah. Yeah. However, in Genesis chapter 20, I want you to look at chapter 20, verse 12. And the reason we're talking about this is the preface to what we're going to be doing next. So in, go ahead, read it out loud for us.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife.
Yeah, so
that's confusing.
Yeah. So in other words, Terah had more than one wife. Okay, so Abram, Nahor, and Haran were the sons of Terah with one mother, but Sarai was a daughter of Terah, but from another mother.
Mary's stepsister.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is my brother.
Which, remember when we were back at the beginning of Genesis, we talked about, well, who did Adam and Eve's kids marry?
Yeah.
Yeah, we like are abhorrent at this. What? That's terrible. You know, it sounds so inbred. But Leviticus, I believe it's Leviticus 17, is where there's a long list of all the people you don't marry. You know, that's no longer considered a good thing to marry. So that happens later on. Hi, good morning. Glad you guys made it.
But then too, when we hear the story, when Abram says, we thought that he was just joking. At least I did. That was his sister, just to protect her.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming. That's why I wanted to kind of look at this, because we're coming now to when they go to Egypt, and Abram says, "Well, she's my sister," and of course that's a half truth. Well, she was a half sister, no, but I mean, it is a half true. It's misleading, right? And he, pardon? Yeah, he did it on purpose, and even states he did it on purpose to protect himself. Also, we're going to learn a little bit about Egyptians and what they thought was important and how things went with them. So that it plays into that too. Hi, I'm glad you guys are here. Just so you know, and fair to notice, we are not on Facebook Live, but I am recording because this morning I didn't load the video right.
Okay.
And so if I don't do this, then I'm going to have to try to figure out how to get it.
So we have to behave.
No, you can say whatever you want. I can edit it, but it is recorded. So I just like for people to know when a recording is going. Okay, so in chapter 11, then you can see things setting up to be ready for what's coming next, Eve, and that's what we're seeing. And so in 1 to 11, chapters 1 to 11 of Genesis, note mental note? 1 to 11. So how many chapters are there in the whole? We're only in the first 11 chapters. All of these chapters, right, in this whole book, and we're in the first 11. And what is the main point of the first 11? Don't answer, I'll tell you. But the main point, what is the main point of the first 11 chapters? The main point is that man cannot fix his sin problem.
Man cannot what?
Man can't fix sin.
Oh, okay.
The people who were good, they didn't stay good. They did wrong things. Everyone that we've read about, have we read about anybody who just was really great? We're going to get to someone coming up that seems to be really great, but we haven't even said that person's name yet. And so here we go from chapters 1 to 11. God is leading us to understand that this problem of sin existed with even people we would really admire and respect. Of course, Adam and Eve, I mean, what could be? So from the beginning of time, sin has been a problem. My curiosity, I wonder if sin was a problem before. You know, we talked about that weird thing between verse 1 and 2 in Genesis, and how some people have that gap theory where they think that the earth actually existed in some form, and when Satan was thrown down from heaven, that he was thrown to earth and it was all destroyed, like there was something before that. Who knows? But it is kind of funny to think about that in this case, what we know with us is God is showing us the problem with sin. Were those people Neanderthals that we're reading about? Were they like, you know, they had big foreheads and big brows and they were kind of dumb?
I don't really know. I wasn't there.
Yeah, did Adam and Eve seem like dummies?
Oh, maybe.
See, we have this weird thing from science that we've been taught in schools that we started as these Neanderthals and we slowly learned how to make fire, and then we learned how to knock rocks together, and then do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. But that's not really the way Scripture depicts humankind from the time God created. They were intelligent people living in their time. So last night, David and I watched yesterday we watched Clint Eastwood. He's in a movie in the theater right now where he goes and rescues a kid from Mexico. It's a new movie. It's out. It's playing at the theaters right now. It was good. But you know how old Clint Eastwood is? Because the day before yesterday, David and I watched In Line of Fire, I think it's called.
Yes.
In the Line of Fire.
And you don't spring chicken in that one.
He's not. But they're answering telephones. They're waiting for a phone to ring. You know, the technology, the computers are like those dinosaur computers, and the words type on, and they're all, they're looking at the words type on there and thinking, oh my goodness. You know, we've been watching NCIS and, everything's, so it's just so funny to see the difference. Yeah. But was Clint Eastwood dumber then? Were those people not as smart as the people now? I think they're the same.
Yeah,
We're just as smart. We're using different tools.
right.
We're smart about different things.
I didn't know electronics.
Technology has sunk in.
There's always something we don't know. I don't know how to raise a sheep.
That's right.
If you gave me 3 sheep and said, here you go, Laura, you need to live on this for a year,
You mean live?
I'd be going, okay, I'm not sure. What do they eat? And how do I get what? And I guess what I found out when we were in Cornfield, I did some research on the sheep and the goats, and they raised the sheep for meat, but they raised the goats for milk. Mm-hmm. And so you had to make sure you didn't have too many mix of sheep and goats because they ate different grass. So the sheep ate the tender grass. If I didn't have Google, I'd be sunk. Because I'd be Googling, what does sheep eat? What do sheep eat in Welton? Right? But is it smart? Were they not as smart? No, they're just as smart.
But it's actually
Smarter
pretty
in
amazing.
the
I mean,
old ways.
they didn't have matches or a lighter. I mean, they discovered how to create
Fire.
fire. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
There's so much that we we just have different smarts. We are capable in different ways. And when I saw Clint Eastwood in that movie from yesterday, he's 91 now.
Oh my God.
Is he really?
He's
Yeah,
super
I thought he
stiff,
was in his 90s.
you know, like this.
He's
And
like Betty
David and I
White,
are
he's never
going,
gonna stop acting.
well, and David and I said, we're going to get busy on our stretching exercises. That's enough. We're looking at it. But for the grace of God, that's where we're going, because we just feel ourselves getting stiff with age, right? As we get older. So I just make that point because it's another part of what we're going to be talking about as we come up, that Abram in chapter 11, verse 31, Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from the Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. So where were they going? They were going to Canaan. Did they get to Canaan? No. They settled in Haran.
Yeah.
And so that's where they settled. And I heard a pastor once say that the reason they stopped in Haran is because he couldn't get over the death of his son Haran. I don't know that that's true. I don't see that in the scripture, and I don't like to say that because, but it does make sense. He was going to Canaan. We don't know that he was called to go to Canaan. All we know is Haran was headed to Canaan, and he stopped in Haran, and that's where he stayed. And so then from there we have Abram and his kids, and everybody's there in Haran with dad. And then in verse 32, Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. 205. Do you see the years getting smaller with time? Yeah, we keep getting smaller. So Terah is down here, right here. So 200 would be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Probably like right around there. So that's not dissimilar. The ages are just getting smaller and smaller, shorter and shorter. Okay? Chapter 12. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Did you catch that? Who is he supposed to leave?
His people and his father's household.
Very specific. And the land. You're supposed to leave your country, your people, and your father's household. And you're going to go to the land that I show you. So should Lot have gone? Lot would be his father's household.
Yeah.
Right?
Really shouldn't.
No. I think that there's going to come a time when Abram's going to regret that mistake. I guess we all live and learn, right? How many times have you not done something exactly the way you thought God wanted it done, and it's come to bite you? Like every time, right? Because Satan's always looking for an opportunity. That one moment when we say that critical word just because we think we know, and we know we shouldn't speak or think that way, and sure enough, it comes back to bite us every time. Thank God it does, because it helps us be more cautious, right? Be more careful about living right.
Sometimes we do some of those things out of just emotion. Attachment.
When you know that you're not supposed to do it, and you do it anyway, whether it's emotion, you know.
Exactly.
And then what happens the next time? I usually back it up a little bit. That little bit of caution gets built in there. It's God's way of helping us learn and grow and become better and better. We don't say that you never sin. I didn't care for that part in the sermon this morning because I felt like I wanted to make sure that it's not about that you can just sin any way you want to sin. It's about understanding that you're forgiven and then learning to back up that sin and not repeating that sin again and again, to get over it, to move past it, to do better, to learn, from it. So hopefully people got that message. That's the message he was saying, but I was hoping that it came through. Verse 12, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. Do you think Abram feels like a great nation now? Who is he now? Terah's kid. Bad stuff happened in their home. They moved up. Haran, the brother, died. Things aren't looking all that great, right? I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. because you are the most holy of all men that ever lived on earth. Does your Bible say that?
No, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse.
Okay, but why? Why is he blessed? Was he somebody special? He was good looking, charming, smart? No. No. God is going to make a way to take care of sin. And he picked Abram to be a part of it. Not because Abram was some sort of holier than thou, rich, smart, whatever. Because God chose Abram. Maybe because Abram was willing to be obedient. Maybe that was why. So far, he's showing that he's willing to be obedient. That means that God can use every nimnut in this room. All nimnuts who are willing to be obedient may apply. And God will use us. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Look at Galatians 3:8. Go eat popcorn. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Galatians 3:8. Okay. You there? Galatians 3:8. The scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So those who have faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. Abraham was chosen because he showed the aptitude for faith. I don't like to say because he had faith, because it makes it sound like it's an end point. Faith is a practice that we have, right? So God saw that potential for faith in Abraham. Maybe because Abraham obeyed, because Abraham moved on and did what God said to do, went where God said to go. Not because he was somebody special other than that. So we're back in chapter 12, Genesis 12, verse 4. So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Oops.
Yes, yeah.
Oops. Is that going to be a problem?
Turns out to be.
It does turn out to be. It does turn out to be. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out for Haran. 75. How long did his father live? 205 years. So how old is 75? I imagine.
I feel like 25.
You think that young?
Well, a third of your life, something like that.
A third of your life?
Oh, that's true. A third of. Well, if your lifespan at that time was 205, a third of that would be.
Well, 70.
60.
Yes. So it's a little older than a
Maybe
third.
more than that. More like. I mean, it depends.
Like maybe we would be 40s or 50s, maybe, if an equivalent. I'm thinking 75 feels pretty old to Abraham. Of course, I have in mind Clint Eastwood, who was 91. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So here we have the land on the map here, and they've come down from this area here where they were at, come down to this land of Canaan area. And they're residing in this area, the land of Canaan. That's their place. Do you see the name of some other cities down here? Sodom and Gomorrah down there. So we're going to be in this region. And verse 6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the side of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Now, the Canaanites, who were they related to? Do you remember? We had Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Remember the one that was cursed, Ham? He went to that area that became Canaan. That's what we read about the other time. So Ham became the land of Canaan. What was the problem with Ham? He was the one who saw his father naked, which we don't really know if it was more than saw. There's some hints that it was more than saw, but the point was that it was a violation, a sexual nature. And that became the clans or the peoples that settled in the land of Canaan, and they became renowned for their promiscuity and sexual stuff. So hence we get later in time to Sodom and Gomorrah, and it has a reputation even at the time of Lot. So yeah, it's all about sexual sin in that area. So the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. I do have a picture of that, but I don't really that you need to. It's like up here. Bethel is like here, and Ai is up here. And so he pitched his tent right here in these hills between Bethel and Ai, and that's where he built the altar. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. So the Negev desert is down here. When we look at in Egypt area here, we can see the King's Highway, this area here, and down here is the Negev desert before you get to Egypt. Let's go back to our regular world map. I think it's easier to see on that one. Yeah. Here we go. So you can see that they go from here. They came up from to Haran, then Haran down into Canaan, Bethel and Ai, and then they come down here into the Negev desert area. Now, why would they go to the Negev desert area? Well, we're going to see that's a tradition here. It's a practice that all of them did. Well, let's go on here. Verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. So what would happen is people in these regions, the Negev desert and all that, they barely had enough to survive there. Right. You barely had enough to run your flocks. So you would have to really spread out. You didn't have like the city people combining in cities because you had to spread out to survive. And whenever the rains would not come, you'd have to go down to where it was wet. And Egypt had the Nile that flooded. Now up where he was from, up here in where he was at over in and along this Mesopotamian river, the Mesopotamian valley, the Tigris and the Euphrates River would flood, and that's what all these herdsmen would raise their animals on. So that's why when they moved up here to Haran, he came down to Canaan. He's staying over here on this side where you see the green, where there's more moisture and they can still graze their cattle. You move into a desert area, then you really got to encompass a lot of land to be able to graze anything. And if you get a time of less water, you've got to move to where the water is. And it was common for people to gather towards Egypt, because that's where the Nile would flood and that whole area would keep moist, and that's where they would go. We see it later in time when they go to Egypt, because that's where all the grain is at, right? So this is not an unusual thing. It's a common, not an unusual occurrence. I wouldn't say common, because they enjoyed living in their own places, but they had to gather for these times. Verse 11, as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. So you are my sisters. So say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. So there were 128 pyramids in Egypt that were built within 150 years, and that was 500 years at least before Abram went there. So these were long-standing things. Egyptian culture was a long-standing culture, been around a long time, and they were a smart people that had done things like build pyramids. So they were renowned for all the things they knew and had in their area. And of course, they lived where the water was there all the time, where everyone else would come to visit. So they had more city-type structures, not just grazing and all that was going on. They also had a very, the reason I bring up the pyramids, I think that seems weird to bring it up, is because they had this very extensive understanding of eternal life. They believed that everyone and everything was eternal, and that when they died, that was the reason they built the pyramids, was to put the king and stuff in, and they would be mummified along with their cat, their dog, sometimes their servants and their animals, all the things they were going to need when they came to life, because it was all going to come to life. The ruler and all of his animals and stuff. It was a pretty bad day if you were in Egypt and you had a prominent master who died, because if you were a good servant, he would make sure you were killed and mummified right along with him so that you could spend eternity together. So it was one of those things, kind of like, well, I can see the idea, but then it gets kind of sick in the end. So then they're killing the animals and all. China had a similar kind of thing where they would even mummify armies, because so it's quite a thing. But the reason that's brought up is that it's believed that Egypt taught or opened Abraham's ideas mind to a lot of ideas, things that really hadn't been very prominent or well known at the time. And so everyone wonders what kind of influence, what kinds of things did Abram learn from his time when he was in Egypt and then went back. We know he did gain a lot of wealth while he was in Egypt.
Egyptians had a phenomenal understanding of physics.
They did.
They were
And-
so smart.
And they didn't build, some people think that like the pyramids were built by slaves. They weren't built by slaves. The pyramids were built by trained artisans. Not just anyone could build a pyramid.
No.
It had to be done, so they don't believe it wasn't like in the movies where the Israel slaves built the pyramids. That wasn't it.
Who
They
built them?
artisans, like people who are stone cutters and craftsmen who earned wages for building the pyramids.
Okay.
And some of the kings were mean and whooped them into it and whatever, but you had to have a craftsman do it. These were not unintelligent people putting those rocks and stones in place.
And they were following directions from the engineers, I'm sure. It just amazes me.
Right.
I wonder what, because we have definitely, mathematical formulas.
Oh, yeah.
Today, you wonder what their working knowledge was.
We can't build them today. We don't have the knowledge that they had to
If
build.
I'm not mistaken, I heard also that at one time all those pyramids had like marble or something faces on them, but that was taken off by later kings.
Yeah, and they are thousands of years old, so they were there a long time. Just the weather alone would take anything off of the surface. They did not worship death, by the way. Egyptians did not worship death. They just did believe in a resurrection. And some people have taken that, and we see in some of the more modern movies where they'll say, but that really wasn't. Most Egyptians just believed there was a resurrection, but they didn't say that that it was it wasn't that they were worshiping death itself. So you could see how people could say that about Christians. We believe in a resurrection, so we're not afraid of death. Okay, so in chapter 12, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land. Abram went down to Egypt. Skip on down to verse 13. Say, you are my sister. That's a half-truth, right? So he's not an out-and-out liar. He's a half-truth liar. There's another reason he would say this. Egyptians really believed that when you marry someone, you marry the family, not just the female. And so the fathers would get together and arrange a meeting so that we could make sure the family's going to get together. I mean, that the family's going to get along. And so you would be joining the family, and you would be really careful about your status because you wouldn't want to have scandal. So you'd be kind of vetting this family that this girl comes from, making sure that they're up to your par or your stature. And then once they married, the families were linked forever. So it was kind of the Egyptian practice that once you married, that marriage was like you were born into that family. It was all one family. So the brothers and the fathers were treated with great respect, and you were looking for their permission to allow this to happen. That's why Abram was given so much treasure and stuff from these Egyptians, because they wanted to have Sarai be a part of their family. So the family link was like a national link. You were now one of the nation when you were married in Egypt. So if they think that that's her brother, then they're going to be very welcome and try to please her and tell him your brother will get all the good stuff. We had 5 this morning. You know, so it's like tell them I'm your brother so we can get all the good stuff, kind of a thing. Yeah. Okay, verse 14. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. That does not mean she was raped or anything like that. I've seen so many weird. She was taken to have special treatments and be treated, you know, all the perks, while they wooed the family. You know, that was the thing. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle and male and female donkeys, men servants and maid servants. You should circle that because later the maid servant becomes a problem, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here's your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and he sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So the Lord did not allow this to happen. It could have happened, but the Lord did not allow it to happen. And he spoke, my opinion is, he spoke the Egyptians' language, right? He spoke in a way that the Egyptians would understand, no, this is not going to happen. The truth gets revealed. Abraham gets kicked out. Oh, what a terrible, depressing story. No, he got kicked out with all kinds of camels and goats and all kinds of stuff and riches. And he learned a lot from that, right? It was a learning thing for him. The Egyptians were not cursed because of it. They were doing their thing. But God took care of Abram and made sure that that didn't happen. But Abraham's learning. He's learning all kinds of stuff. And now he leaves a rich man. Chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev. So he was down here in this Egypt area. And now he's back up in the Negev desert, with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abraham had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel. So he's kind of going around here, and he comes across Bethel, and he kind of likes Bethel. It's like in this area here. And Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So that's that place he went before, between Bethel and Ai, where he had built the altar thing. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So he's becoming so big, herds are spreading out, they can't stay on the same land. They're arguing over well water or grazing pasture. Verse 8. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's put part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Now, who's the tag along here? Lot. And yet Abram's saying, look, whichever way you want to go. Also, who's the older? Lot. Abram's the older one. So he should actually be able to just say, I'll take this, you take that. But he doesn't want any bad blood. So he'll take whatever piece he gets, and then there will be no bad blood. Lot got to choose what he chose. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt towards Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. So he's going to choose to be out here in this eastern part. And right now, Abram is up in this area. So he's going to be on the eastern part. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So the fertile valley is where Lot stays, and he particularly likes Sodom. Do we know if Lot was participating in the evils that were going on in Sodom? No, we don't have any evidence of that. It looks, from what we see, his family was there, but he appears to have been righteous, because later on we know in the story that God said, well, what if there's just one righteous? What if there's just two righteous? Remember that? We're going to see that later. So don't assume necessarily that Lot's a part of what's going on there, but he's definitely in that neighborhood, and it's going on all around. He might have been. I'm just saying. Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. So God tells Abram, Lot's parted. Okay, now Abram, look to the north and the south. I'm giving all of this to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring would be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I'm giving it to you. So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. So we see here that Abram now has come into his own. He has his own stuff. He's rich. He has lots of people, lots of herds, and he has a great amount of land that God is going to bless him in. Things are going well for him. He's not yet, though, the Lord of his kingdom. He's not yet the king, or it's more like a tribal lord, like a leader of this people. It's more that he's just the patriarch. So the patriarch has certain powers, certainly, but it's not the same thing as a king or a person who has the politics, say, to go with it. It's just that you're the oldest father, and so you're who you are, right? Take a look at chapter 14. I am going to read these very quickly, so you might have to kind of scan with your eyes. At this time, Amraphel, king of Shinar, Ariat, king of Eliezer, blah, 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 verse 3. All these latter kings joined forces in the valley of Siddim, the Salt Sea. For 12 years they had been subject to blah, blah, but in their 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, blah, blah, and the kings allied with him went out and defeated their blah, blahs in blah, blah, and blah, blah, the blah, blah, and blah. Thus, so forth and so on, all the way to verse 7. Then they turned back and went to blah, blah, and they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites who were living in Hazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, that is, marched out and drew up their battle lines in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amphro, king of Shemar, blah, blah, blah. Verse 10. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. The 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot, and his possessions since he was living in Sodom. Now where is Abram? He's in the hills. The hills they ran to, they ran to Abraham's area. Okay, so these other kings, they're more like warlords, like tribal fights among them, you know, and they're fighting over that land that Lot is in, probably because it's nice land, and they're fighting over it. Verse 13. One who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. By the way, that's the first time that Abram is called a Hebrew. I don't know what that means, but I made a note of it because maybe it'll mean something later.
Mm-hmm.
Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre, the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household. Do you hear that?
That's an army.
That's an army. And went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, near Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions together with the women and the other people. When Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. So now what we have occurring is Abram being identified as a leader, as a noble leader, a warlord, or a head of his peoples. He had 318 trained men. He fought off this capture that occurred with these armies that had won all the other guys. He's now king of the roost as far as national politics go, right? He's the one who's the top dog. Verse 18. Then Melchizedek. Oh, you guys remember Melchizedek, right? You better say no, because he doesn't exist anywhere yet.
Oh,
This is the first time we heard anything of Melchizedek.
we heard of him later.
Later, yeah. We read about Melchizedek later on, and this is the very first and one of the very few times that Melchizedek is mentioned. So listen to who Melchizedek is here. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem. Salem is the word for peace. Melchizedek, the king of peace, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram. Wait a minute. I thought Abram was the top dog.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But this guy was a priest.
Of who?
Of God.
Of God.
Yeah.
Most High.
God Most High.
In the area where Abram was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is his blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Now, what is that all about? Well, let's look at some other passages, okay? So like a payoff. Keep your finger here, and let's turn to Psalm 110, because Psalm 110 was written by David. Let's see what, David, King David, the line to Christ, what does he say about Melchizedek? In chapter 110, starting at verse 1. And this is interesting, Charlene, because we know a little bit about Melchizedek because what we read about him in the New Testament and here in Psalms, this is the only original passage for what happened. Psalm 110 was written by David.
Okay.
Says, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand. Okay, right away, what do you know this is about? Who would David's Lord be saying to my Lord? That would be God and the Son. This is a prophecy or a looking forward to the coming of Christ, the Messiah. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. You will rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing on your day of battle. Arrayed in holy majesty from the womb of the dawn, you will receive the dew of your youth. The Lord has shown and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. That's interesting. Now let's take a look at another place. How about in Matthew 22? Would you like to hear Jesus talk about Melchizedek? Matthew chapter 22. I'm holding my fingers, but I don't know if I'm going to have enough fingers here. I should. Matthew 22. Now, this is when Jesus is having a discussion with the Pharisees, and they're kind of arguing back and forth, and he tries to trip them up because they're saying they're talking about the Son of God and the Messiah, and Christ is there talking to them, and he's the Messiah. So he's talking to them about all the rules they have for who the Messiah is. So in Matthew chapter 22, start at verse 41. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Christ?" Now, is that not a trick question? Yeah, he's saying, okay, what do you think about this Christ? Whose son is he? Now, what will they say? Son of David, right? The son of David, they replied. He said to them, "How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord?" Didn't we just read that in 110? In Psalm 110? David called him Lord, sitting by my Lord. The Lord says to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." And then verse 45, "If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" And then what was their reply in verse 46?
You could answer him.
Okay, so what we see is David identifying the Christ will be in the order of Melchizedek, King of Peace, right? In the order of Melchizedek. We see Jesus using the whole Melchizedek thing to trip up the Pharisees. So now there's one more place we can go that actually gives us instruction in Hebrews chapter 7. Chapter 7, starting at verse 1. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Okay, king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, his name means King of Righteousness, then also King of Salem, means King of Peace. Can you see this prophecy of Christ here, this messianic prophecy? Verse 3, without father or mother, without genealogy. Don't they always go back and trace the genealogy? Whose family are you from? But who's Melchizedek's family? No genealogy, no family. Without beginning of days or end of life. Did we ever hear about when Melchizedek died? We don't know where he started. We don't know where he died. Like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from the people, that is their brothers, even though their brothers are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promise. And without doubt, the lesser person is blessed by the greater. Go down to verse 9. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. Yeah, I know. They had this thing about you are your father. Your son is you, that you are connected and you are them. So it's showing the lordship of Christ. He's saying that Melchizedek if Melchizedek they think of Abraham, the big father of the Hebrews, right?
He's higher than Abraham.
Melchizedek is higher than Abraham, and Melchizedek is loaded with preface of the Messiah. Look back at Genesis, the original passage. We have the bread and the wine.
Yeah.
Christ broke bread and wine with his disciples and said, "Take this and eat." It becomes a symbol of the communion. We have a priest of the God Most High. Jesus was priest and king. King of peace, though. He did not do battle here on earth at this time. When he came to us peacefully. Blessed be Abraham High, creator of heaven and earth. Blessed be the God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. And then we have the tithe, the giving of the tithe to Melchizedek.
So where did Melchizedek come from?
Melchizedek, that's what we don't know. We don't know where he came from. It says right here that he was the king of Salem, which may have been a place. It means peace. Salem means peace, so it's a place. It says that he was a priest of the God Most High. So of Lord God, he was a priest. So we don't know. There was no priesthood at that time. They didn't have all the rules, but he was marked as a priest. And Abraham tithed a tenth of all that he had to him. So what we really think is that this Melchizedek, and is referred to later on, becomes a look toward the promise. Remember back in when God first calls Abraham in chapter 12? He's in chapter 12, verse 2, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." How is God going to bless all peoples on earth? Through the line of Abraham? Because Christ is going to come through that line. That's the provision for sin. God is showing us and giving us tips right here that he's got and works this provision for taking care of sin. It's going to take years to complete, but it's in the works. It's in the works here as we read. Go back to 14, verse 21. The king of Sodom said to Abraham, oh, that's probably a noble guy, huh? You think the king of Sodom's a noble guy? Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the thong of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Ahor, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share. So we have here Abraham coming into his position as a leader of a great nation. He's becoming a nation where he defends, where he's Lord, king of his domain. And we have this foreshadowing of Melchizedek based on the first covenant that's with Abraham. God is teaching Abraham what he needs to know and positioning him for what's going to come next. He's not perfect, but he's a good man. And you can see how noble he is here. Melchizedek didn't tell him, well, don't take anything. There was no instruction here. He just knew what the right thing was. And he's keeping himself untainted by these other forces or things coming into him, and keeping himself noble. Not like when he went to Egypt.
Yeah.
You think he learned something when he went to Egypt? That half lie, that half truth? He's becoming noble. He's becoming a patriarch. He's becoming a leader. Now, he has no children yet. 0 children.
Is Melchizedek a foreshadowing of Jesus?
Yes. Melchizedek is a foreshadowing of Christ. Christ brings it up as an example to mess up the Pharisees' thinking, right? So they talked about Melchizedek. Where did he come from? Where did he go? You have all the symbols within Melchizedek that Christ himself establishes and says, I am from the line of Melchizedek. So it's that idea that they did trace the genealogy, but the genealogy is not the key. The key is who he was as Messiah. Yeah, a foreshadowing. So did you write down those scriptures? Because those ones I gave you are the ones you would look at if you want to look at it later on. You want me to say them again in case you didn't get them? It's a Psalm 110, verses 1 to 4. Matthew 22, verses 41 to 43. And Hebrews chapter 7, verses 1 to 6. So Abraham is, pardon? 7, 1 through 6.
I've never had anybody put all that together before, I don't think.
Oh, yeah?
No,
Yeah.
So Abraham is now behaving as a noble king, a truly noble king. That's what we see, Abraham growing up. So we will not have a lesson next week. I'll be gone, I'll be out of town, so I'll see you the week after.